Good afternoon. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece on May 20th, 2024. I'm pleased to be joined today by Laith Marouf. Laith is a consultant and expert in broadcasting law. He's a geopolitical commentator, also the executive director of Free Palestine TV, which is doing some very important reporting in Lebanon, and he is based in Beirut. He's joined me before, and I'm pleased to have him on the program again. Thank you for joining me today, Laith.
It's always good to be with you.
So, Laith, today has been quite a day. Actually, the extraordinary events began last night or sometime yesterday when the world learned that a helicopter carrying the Iranian president, Ebrahim Raisi, and the foreign minister, amongst others, had suffered what they called hard landing in mountains in the northwest of Iran. And then due to terrible weather conditions, it took hours for a whole bunch of rescue teams to actually reach the crash site. This morning, we received confirmation from the Iranian government that no one survived. It was, in fact, not simply a hard landing. It appears to have been a terrible crash. The helicopter appears to have been burned, and they acknowledged that the president of Iran has tragically passed away. So has the foreign minister and others who were on that helicopter. And then some hours later, and personally, I don't believe that this is coincidental, the timing of it, I should say, we received really a momentous announcement in many ways from the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court that he had essentially commenced or was about to commence a process to obtain arrest warrants for 3 Hamas leaders and the Israeli Prime Minister and the Israeli Defense Minister, so Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. And I'd like to address these two subjects with you today. And just to be clear, when I said I don't think the timing was coincidental, I think that for a whole bunch of reasons we'll get into, Karim Khan, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, really didn't want to indict any Israeli official, only did it very belatedly under intense pressure, and was probably looking for an opportunity. I can't prove this, but he was probably looking for an opportunity to make this announcement when the world was distracted by something else. I think he probably was ready to make that announcement, and the speculation on my part, but knowing how people like Karim Khan behave and think, he thought, if I announce this today, fewer people are going to pay attention to it because the world is so gripped by this, the events that are happening in Iran. But anyways, that's just me. So let's get into it, Laith. I'd like to start by asking you, and you tend to have your ear to the ground and be very up to speed as much as you can be in Beirut about the events in West Asia, and particularly involving the axis of resistance. What do we know at this particular point in time? What are the basic facts that we can be pretty comfortable about in terms of what happened to that helicopter?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a tragic day, I think, all around. Both subjects that we're going to be talking about, I think, are tragic. And it's a sad day for the axis of resistance as a whole, for people's questing liberation on this planet. People all across the world right now that had built these relationships, coalitions across continents to fight off American imperialism, are in mourning one of their symbols, and very strong politicians that have, since their elections, really simplified the new multipolar world that is emerging. What we know is that there was an inauguration of a dam on the river that's on the border between Iran and Azerbaijan, on the side of Iran where the president of Azerbaijan arrived for the ceremonies for this hydroelectric dam that was going to service both nations. And at the end of the ceremony, the 3 helicopters, all American made old helicopters that were pre-Iranian Revolution that flew off, with one helicopter carrying the President Raisi and the Foreign Minister Abdullahian. And two of those helicopters made it to their destination, and the helicopter carrying President Raisi and the Foreign Minister, along with 7 other people. The total is 9 people in the helicopter perished. So we know that the region it crashed in is a national park. It's forested area. It is also very known for extreme weather. It was below zero temperatures yesterday, reaching -15. There was snow, there was fog, there was rain. These are the basics of what we know how it happened, and it took us all night, obviously, to reach the site of the crash because of how remote it is, and there's no roads to the site. There was many teams involved, something like 30 somewhat search teams. In the end, 5 of those teams reached the site early in the morning. Some help was offered and delivered by Turkey, with a Turkish specialized drone flying over the site where the crash happened and providing some heat and night vision because of the fog. So up until now, we don't know really what's the purpose, how the crash happened. There was multiple reports, obviously, on the Iranian media that I still don't understand how this happened. But right after the crash, there was reports on the national Iranian media that there was 2 calls from different cell phones from the team on that helicopter. And around 1 or 2 a.m., again, Iran time, there was another announcement by the Minister of Internal Affairs saying that there was another call. But now we see everybody's dead. So I just don't, these things don't add up in my mind.
Is it possible that those calls, if they in fact occurred, happened before the actual crash, let's say at a point where the helicopter was in trouble, but before the crash? Do we know whether they were they presented to the public as having been made after this so-called hard landing?
Yes, including the one that's pretty late at night while the search was happening. The Minister of Internal Security, I guess, said that they just received a call from one of the crew members or something on the. So I think it's very hard to tell right now what really happened.
Do we know if there was any kind of a distress call before the actual crash occurred? Is there any information about that to your knowledge?
No, I don't have that information. Nobody reported that there was any distress call. So that's another issue. If it was in the process of crashing, then they should. We will see. As right now, we were informed that there will be a joint investigation of the crash, or fully Iranian investigation that will include the Revolutionary Guard Intelligence Corps, the Military Intelligence Corps, and the Intelligence Ministry, all starting tomorrow. Obviously, the black box is going to be a very, big piece of evidence that everybody's going to be looking for, and looking at the recordings of the conversations on, between the people on the helicopter and the helicopter and dispatch or the towers. So that's starting tomorrow. When it was happening, in my mind, once the hard landing was announced, I personally couldn't believe that it took this long for the helicopter to be found. And so the question is, in my mind, was going at that moment, late at night, and I didn't sleep that well, obviously, like most of us in this region now, was that either they were dead and the Iranian government was trying to figure out its own, steps that it has to take to fill that gap and tomorrow and how they're going to do it, and or that they knew that they were alive and they were just, milking the attention. That's what I thought in them, because in either case, it doesn't make sense in my head how long this took for, and I think, looking at what has happened over the last month, the attack on the Iranian embassy in Damascus, the response that came from President Raisi. He ordered the attacks on Israel. I believe there is no way that this is not an assassination. Okay. Now, the question is, how will Iran deal with it? Can they prove...
This is such an important question, but I'd like to separate that question. How will Iran respond? And this is the very reason why, we should, all of us, whatever your views may be about the axis of resistance, as many of us refer to it, about the government of Iran, about Raisi, all of us have a stake in what the Iranian government concludes about this, because this could very easily, and we'll get into this in a moment, result in a catastrophic war, the likes of which we haven't really experienced in our lifetimes, frankly, because this would implicate a full-blown war with Iran, would not only be utterly devastating for the entire region, including Israel, but it would also do immense damage to the global economy. It might very well suck in China and Russia. Again, I want to just park all of that, but this is why this question that you and I are about to discuss, what happened, is so important. It's not because your opinion or my opinion about what happened is ultimately going to make a difference. And I think you'll agree with me, Laith. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I certainly admit readily that this could have been an accident. It's certainly possible this was an accident. At the end of the day, we're going to have to see what the evidence is, and there's a hell of a lot we don't know. But I think at this stage, I do think we should be having a discussion to prepare ourselves what might be coming about hypotheses. What are the most plausible hypotheses? And I personally have to agree with you, at least if you're terming it in this way, if you're putting this as a hypothesis that remains to be explored and investigated, I have to agree with you that it's really difficult not to believe that this is somehow sabotage. And I'm going to invite you to explain your position why, but I just want to say briefly what my position is. On April 13th, as you mentioned, the government of Iran, led by Raisi, launched an attack on Israel that was without precedent. Those of us who are actually sane and look at these things objectively understand that this was a humiliating experience for Israel, even with all of the help of the United States and the British, the French, the Jordanians. A number of ballistic missiles penetrated the air defenses, hit the most sensitive military targets in Israel, including the Nevatim Air Base. Israel's retaliation afterwards, and Israel has a long and barbaric record of retaliating disproportionately, was really a joke. I think the evidence suggested that they destroyed an S-400 air defense system in Isfahan, Iran, but that was it. And not even clear that they did that much. And it just was so out of character for Israel not to retaliate in some extraordinarily violent or provocative way. So now here we are, 5 weeks later. And I would also bears pointing out that although it appears that this helicopter never was in Iran, Azerbaijani airspace, It was near the border, right on the border, as I understand it. And Azerbaijan is a close ally of Israel and the United States. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, there is one or more Israeli military bases there. Certainly, you would think that Israeli intelligence and military personnel and American intelligence and military personnel are present on the territory of Azerbaijan. I find it very curious that 3 helicopters left, and 2 of them reached their destination safely despite the weather. And the one that just happened to have the president of the country and the foreign minister crashed. The others didn't crash. And you would think that the authorities in Iran would assign their best pilots and their best helicopters to the presidential entourage. Again, doesn't mean this wasn't an accident, but you know, if I were a betting man, and I used to be, I would say it's more likely that there's some kind of sabotage happening here. So that's my view about it all. And you know, I'm interested. Please take your time, and why don't you lay out for us your thinking on this subject, and then we'll get into the question of where, if Iran comes to the conclusion that this was sabotage, rightly or wrongly, it comes to that conclusion, what is going to happen next? So please elaborate.
Yeah, so look, after the assassination of General Soleimani, I remember Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, in his commemoration speech, spoke about how the Israelis, whenever they suddenly order a lot of attention in the Western media on a person, it is an indicator that the Israelis are going to assassinate them. Okay. And so just before the assassination of Soleimani, there was all these articles published in the West and, you know, segments produced in the television stations and so on, all giving all this attention to Soleimani. And so when Soleimani visited Beirut 2 nights before his assassination, or actually the night before he was leaving to Baghdad before his assassination, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, you know, told him, why are you, you know, look, there's all this been produced. Okay, you're going right now on a public flight. He was going on a regular flight, taking a seat. This is the commander of Al-Quds brigades, and that's how he was arriving. It was announced, your enemy knows where you are and what's going to happen to you. Why are you so? And of course, what ended up happening is that General Soleimani was assassinated and was martyred. And now we saw over the last few weeks, specifically a lot of attention being given to President Raisi in a lot of the media in the West, unusual attention. And so in a way, it is like a indicator that this assassination was coming. Okay. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the Israelis have a habit of assassinating the political leadership of their opposition as a revenge tactic for their failures on the battlefield. Anytime the Israelis fail on the battlefield, they assassinate a leader. Okay. And the you know, axis of resistance in general has never, in fact, if you look at it, and historically, there's been only one assassination of an Israeli minister, for instance, okay, by the PLFP, the Palestinian Front, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, during the Second Intifada, as a retaliation for the killing of the leadership of the PLFP on the ground in the West Bank. But in general, the axis of resistance doesn't use this tactic of assassinating Zionist leadership for 2 reasons. One, because the Israelis don't have any heroes. And if you assassinate these pigs, these monsters, these ghouls, then the Zionists will have heroes and they will have martyrs. And you know, so the axis of resistance doesn't want to give the Zionists, although they can At any moment, Hezbollah can assassinate Israeli leadership if it wants to, with their targeted drones and what have you. Even they could, they've flown over the visits of the Minister of Defense of Israel on the border with Lebanon. They're basically telling him, we can kill you if we want to, and they didn't. Again, not true. And the other thing is that because in reality, assassinations of personalities, when you have institutions, are irrelevant to the course of the battle. So there's no need to waste. In fact, if your enemy is so dumb, assassinating them is a problem, because maybe somebody smarter will come. And as we see, the whole leadership of Israel, the whole society of Israel, are lunatic crazies, the leaders, the political and the military. And if you're assassinating leadership, means change in how activities happen, and then you don't know how your enemy is going to play, so there's no need for it realistically in a battlefield. So the only people that do follow this vengeful bloodlust as a response to failures on the battlefield are the Israelis. And obviously the Israelis, after the beating they got in the response of Iran, have held this vengeance until they were able to reach their target, which is the assassination of the president of Iran.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're in a world where obviously things could spiral out of control very quickly. As I said already, and I think it bears repeating, whether we are right or wrong, whatever you and I may believe, whatever really anybody other than the Iranian government believes at the end of its investigation, is in a very real sense irrelevant. What's going to determine whether or not this becomes a catastrophic war, in my mind, is going to be the conclusions that it reaches based upon its investigation. And it probably is, I mean, I think it's fair to say, by far in the best position of any government out there to investigate this matter, because the crash, the flight began in its airspace, the crash happened on its soil. It will have access to the black box, to the other remnants of this aircraft. It has the technological sophistication to conduct an investigation of this nature. It's going to be assisted by the governments of Iran and China and Russia, which also have immense technological sophistication. So it's going to come to its own conclusions. And the question I'm wondering about, Laith, because it's very easy to imagine a situation, I mean, just based on, I'm a layperson and I'm not any kind of an expert in forensic examination of crash sites, but looking at the imagery, the video imagery of the crash site, it may be difficult for them to come to any kind of conclusion with high confidence. Let's imagine a world in which, after conducting as thorough an investigation as they can, they believe it is very plausible that it was sabotage, but they don't know for sure that it was sabotage, and they can't say with high level of confidence who actually committed the act of sabotage. For example, might it have been some violent opponent of the Iranian government within Iran, acting separately or distinctly from Israel and the United States? So if we end up in this sort of world of ambiguity, where nothing can be said with a high level of confidence after this investigation, what do you think the Iranian government will do?
I highly doubt that the Iranian government will say the Israelis assassinated their president. Not because they wouldn't have the evidence, or maybe they already even know right now, but because, number one, it's a big humiliation. It's a big punch that landed. And the Iranians have made mistakes before of putting multiple important people in the same flight and them being assassinated in crashes. So in like 2003, 2004, there was a helicopter flight full of the top generals of Iran. A whole team gone. And so, and it's part of it is this, I think in Iran, or believing that maybe these things will not happen. I'm not sure if they're that confident about it, or they're not, they're like, okay, martyrdom comes anytime. So there is a big problem putting the foreign affairs minister and the president in the same flight. That's the question. Why did it happen? And if jamming, electronic warfare was used in this crashing, why then, the question of why didn't Iran have the defenses for something like this? How, so I personally, I'm feeling at this moment that the Iranian government will never admit that the Israelis assassinated their president. And so what will this mean to the possible responses to an assassination that you don't admit? I think the only possible response is clandestine work, just like this assassination. And it's probably better if the Iranians will want to land a blow of equivalency to this assassination. It's probably better for them to not even admit that this was an assassination. So nobody can say that the Iranians responded by whatever, let's say, liquidating one of the Zionist government officials. This is, it's sad. I'm very sad about all of this. But at this moment, none of the logic, everything has to be 100% thought out because as you said, this could lead us to a world war, right? So any move that Iran will do right now has to be thought 100 steps ahead, okay? Even if they have the evidence and they come out right now saying, okay, we have the evidence the Israelis used this device from this territory to down this helicopter. What next? Once you say that, you have to go to war. It's a full-out war. And there's no return from this point. And the snowball there's no way to stop this snowball. Okay, this is not an attack on an embassy. This is an assassination of a president. This requires full carpet bombing of the Zionist colony. Okay. So this is why I think what we will see is, because Iran is its ultimate goal is the end of the Zionist colony, the liberation of Palestine, with or without this assassination of President Raisi. The Zionists want to force Iran and the axis of resistance to switch the whole plan that they have been playing out over the last 7 months, that has been driving Israel into internal collapse and global isolation and collapse of its relationships with the rest of the planet without a direct war. The Israelis will want Iran to actually drag us into a world war so they can save off their collapse of their colony by bringing the United States and the West into this war. So this is where it's sad, but I think the Iranians will refuse to be derailed from the plan that they have laid out already with Raisi at the leadership.
I'm reassured that you feel that way, because any sane person, again, whatever your views are of Iran and its allies in the region, any sane person would want to avoid that full-blown war. Even if you're just 100% supportive of Israel and all you care about is the survival of Israel, the sane thing to do is to advocate for the avoidance of a full-blown war between Israel and Iran, because Israel is going to be devastated. Of course, Iran would suffer immense damage as well, especially if the West comes into it. They're certainly capable, despite their military incompetence, of killing vast numbers of civilians, Israel and its Western backers. So whatever your political orientation may be or feelings about Israel, Iran, the same thing to do is to not want this to spiral out of control. And in a way, I think I agree with you about this, Laith. In the way, the best revenge would be for Iran to stay the course, because Israel is losing, decidedly losing. And in that regard, and maybe we just take a couple of minutes about this, since we've agreed to talk today about these momentous events. Have you any news? It's very clear that Israel, to my mind, I read daily reports from the resistance groups in the region, many of which are accompanied by videos. I follow the Israeli press, and it's limited but nonetheless useful disclosures about casualties the Israeli military is suffering. There's commentary coming out of senior people in the Israeli military and intelligence about the failure to defeat Hamas and how that whole thing is going badly. Since we last spoke in the last couple of weeks, do you have any important news to tell us about developments on the front? In other words, in Gaza, in the occupied West Bank, in northern Palestine on the border with Lebanon?
Yeah, I mean, the situation in Gaza has been very intense. Actually, it's been a week now of the longest and the hardest battle in all of this war, 7 months, in the area of Jabalia in the north of Gaza, where the Israelis attempted to invade and have, in their first day of invasion 7 days ago, they lost a field marshal, basically, a field general. This is the highest ranking general or officer on the field of any army, and with him, his team. And since then, we've heard, of course, multiple officers, brigadier generals, and others that have been killed. And so this has been the most intense battle. And we could see from that number one, Israel has not been able to defeat Hamas on any of the battlefields. It has not been able to clear northern Gaza. In fact, they're right now getting the beating of their life. And we watched all these videos over this last weeks showing tens of tanks and bulldozers and APCs being destroyed on video. This is other than the ones that we don't have documented video evidence from the resistance on. And we also saw the Americans finally finishing their pier. And as I have predicted, it is an occupation pier. So now the Americans have air defenses on the beach of Gaza, and tanks and so forth waiting in the landing ships. And some people were thinking that this pier would be about the expulsion of Palestinians to Cyprus. But you know what? Cyprus will never agree to that. It will never have happened. Cyprus's population is what, 400,000 people?
Yeah, and let me just interject there, Laith. I know Cyprus well. My sister lives in Cyprus. She's married to a Greek Cypriot who was displaced as a young boy from northern Cyprus by the invading Turkish forces. As much as the Turkish Cypriot government is a collaborator with Israel, and it is, and I've condemned it repeatedly for this, the idea that Greek Cypriots are going to want to welcome onto their little island the part that remains to them, because not much does after the Turkish invasion and occupation, an Arabic population that is predominantly Muslim is absolutely laughable. I mean, anybody who thinks that's going to happen is smoking some bad dope. So clearly they won't try to find destinations for these refugees.
Yes.
please go ahead.
But obviously, if there is a mass expulsion, the first stepping pad is Cyprus, even if they have plans for them. Okay. But truly, this will never happen. This fear is for the possibility of an invasion by American and Western troops in the situation, as we see, of total collapse of the Israeli military, okay, and to save off that total collapse as this battle develops. I want to say, jump to Lebanon here, and I'm going to connect it to Cyprus. Last week, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, in his speech, spoke about the issue of Syrian refugees here in Lebanon. In the last week or so, the security forces that are, the internal security that are loyal to the Sunni Future Party and Hariri, the former prime minister, they have been going on a rampage in the streets of Lebanon, stopping people, checking their IDs, and Syrians that had even legal residency are having their residency revoked. They're raiding shops and restaurants and rounding people up, workers, Syrian workers. So this has created a really tense situation even between the Syrian government and the Lebanese government, and the West is pressuring Lebanon. We don't know to do what. Okay, so Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah addressed this issue and said, look, the West has two choices. Either they lift the Caesar's sanctions over Syria, the sanctions that are strangling the Syrian economy, and allow the repatriation of Syrian refugees into Lebanon, because it is the EU that is refusing to allow Syrians to go back to their homeland in Lebanon. They're not allowed. They stop them at the border, recruits from the EU and others saying, why are you going back, and give them money to stay. So he said either the EU and the West lifts the sanctions on Syria and allow the refugees to go back to their home, or the Lebanese army should open the door for all Syrian refugees to go to Cyprus with the help of the Lebanese army, and let them deal with 2 million souls landing on the shores of Cyprus. Okay, it was an open threat, but it played on many emotions here, including the Syrian nationalist emotions that see Cyprus as part of Greater Syria. And can you imagine you could get Cyprus to be back part of Syria with just throwing 2 million refugees without even a war? So he spoke to all parts of the society here, saying, look, either or. So now we see how Cyprus, because of it being used as a base for the British and American and French militaries to project their plots against Palestine, against Lebanon, against Syria, is actually going to lead to the end of the existence of Cyprus. If Cyprus and the Cypriot people do not push off the shackles of these occupiers, these colonizers, the British and the French and the Americans, there will be no more Cyprus. We will not die here in quiet. The refugees and the Syrian refugees will not be humiliated in the streets of Lebanon. That's what Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah is promising. We will not allow this to happen.
I want to remind my audience who not let them know if they're not already aware of it. When I embarked upon my trip across West Asia at the beginning of March, my first stop was Cyprus, and I went to this military base on the southern tip of Cyprus. It's called Akrotiri, and for people to know just how colonized Cyprus is, technically, as a matter of international law, it's considered to be British territory, even though it's on the island of Cyprus, because as a condition of letting the Cypriots have whatever sovereignty the British were prepared to accord to them, the Cypriot had to agree to cede this piece of land and another piece of land on the island to Britain, and it's sovereign territory of Britain. And I walked on this sovereign territory right up to the barbed wire fence. This was in March. I did this twice actually, and filmed drones taking off from that base. They looked to me to be surveillance drones. Very likely were heading for Gaza. Maybe they were heading for northern Israel, or both. And in addition, I saw huge Airbus manufactured military transport planes taking off regularly in the direction of Israel. You know, they have a set trajectory and they take off constantly. They head west, and then they veer left and they head towards the Zionist colony. And this is what's happening. And not only that, but that base is being used by the Americans and the British to bomb Yemen. So the Cypriots are in it up to their necks, and there were protests there by Greek Cypriots who were saying to the press, you can find these press reports, although it wasn't widely reported, you know, you are potentially exposing us to a disaster, you, the British and the Americans and the French, by drawing us into this genocide and this unjust war against the people of Yemen. But in
and the Greek Cypriot president was here last week in Lebanon. Basically, he's shitting his pants.
He should be. He should
be.
You know, I also want to say,
and this is why Nasrallah addressed the Cypriots this way, basically.
Right. Well, that was, you know, he's definitely, I think, going to strike a nerve with that commentary. The other thing about the Cypriots, something that they'll be keenly aware of, and I was there in 2015 on the island of Lesbos in the Aegean, which was the main flashpoint of the refugees who were pouring across the narrow straits between Turkey and the Greek islands, largely Syrian, also Afghan refugees, Iraqi refugees. Some Palestinians were pouring out of Erdogan's Turkey into the Greek islands, and this almost destabilized the entire European Union. These people were then using their presence on EU soil. They got a foothold on EU soil to head northward in massive numbers. And at that point in time, Laith, in 2015, shall we say, the socio-economic circumstances for incoming refugees from West Asia were not nearly as hostile as they are now. There is a far greater degree of hostility, as far as I can tell. I spent a lot of time in the EU, amongst the populace of EU countries towards immigration from Africa and West Asia. So this is a potentially explosive issue. And this is one of the things which, you know, whatever Hassan Nasrallah does or any leader of a resistance group may do, if there is a full-blown war in West Asia between Iran and Israel, there are going to be outflows of desperate migrants such as we have never seen in our lifetimes. You know, again, anybody with an ounce of sanity would want desperately to avoid this war, whatever your political orientation may be. In any event,
what we're seeing now is just a rehearsal, including this genocide in Gaza. It's just a rehearsal of if a full-out war comes, and we are at the edge of that abyss at this moment. We don't know if we're going to fall altogether, and how.
Yeah. So before we switch over to this character, Karim Khan, the so-called prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, I have some choice words for him today. I want to just talk to you one last aspect of all of this, and that is I was struck by the statements that are coming out of not just local governments in West Asia, but also from the non-Western world about the death of the Iranian president. I'm going to read some of the language. And by the way, am I correct in understanding that Lebanon has declared 3 days of mourning?
Yes, 3 days of mourning in Lebanon, in Pakistan, that one was more shock. I mean, it was shocking already for Lebanon.
Right.
But just to Pakistan, it's, and that shows you how much the whole region, because Pakistan is a neighbors country to Iran, but it is as governed right now by a coup militia, a junta that did a coup against President Imran Khan, which was closer to Iran and Russia. So to hear the Pakistani government and all the national television stations in Pakistan cut all their regular programming and are doing wall-to-wall coverage of what's happening, and they're probably going to cover the funeral, the 3-day processions that are going to happen in Iran over the next 3 days.
And just on Lebanon, returning to Lebanon, I want to be clear about this. It's not Hezbollah which has declared 3 days of mourning. It's the Lebanese government. Is that correct?
Yes, the sitting prime minister and declared the 3 days of mourning, closing all the government offices and bringing the flags to half-mast. There's also 3 days of mourning in Syria announced. So
can I just also share with our audience some of the other reactions, because I want to I don't want to focus only on the reactions within the region. China's foreign ministry spokesman said President Xi Jinping has already sent a direct message. He called the president of Iran I believe he said one of China's best friends, a dear friend of China, and wanted to continue, quote, developing the comprehensive strategic partnership between China and Iran. Those are pretty hefty words. And then you have the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. And I'm quoting him, Syed Ebrahim Raisi was an outstanding politician whose entire life was devoted to serving the motherland. As a true friend of Russia, he made an invaluable personal contribution to the development of good neighborly relations between our countries and made great efforts to bring them to the level of strategic partnership. So you have both China and Russia in these statements describing their relationship with the Islamic Republic of Iran as being of strategic importance. So I think this is really, and I could go on, the Turkish president and so forth, this tremendous sort of outpouring, at least on the surface, of sympathy for the country of Iran and the Iranian people. And I think this is important to understand that, there are countries out there, including China and Russia, who are not at all interested seeing Iran crushed by the West and its diabolical proxy in West Asia. And they would react very negatively to any kind of any serious attempt in order to destroy Iran or effect some kind of regime change in Iran. Do you think, what are your thoughts in particular about, let's suppose that we're right at the end of the day, Iran thinks this may well have been some kind of sabotage. Maybe the Israelis were behind this in some way, but we're not going to admit it and we're going to stay the course. Do you agree with me that this may actually end up strengthening Iran's position within the region? I mean, eliciting a tremendous amount of sympathy and appreciation for its strategic restraint.
Yeah, I mean, we already heard statements from all the Gulf states, condolences from Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi, Emirates, Oman. Everybody is pretty, consoling in their words, and we, that shows you, number one, that nobody wants to have any of the fallout on them. But also, I want to say that Sayyid Raisi was the person who signed the strategic partnerships with China and with Russia. He is the president that brought Iran into the BRICS. He is, and along with his foreign minister, Abdollahian, which is one of the youngest ever ministers in the history of Iran, were able to build new relationships and revive them in Africa and Latin America above and beyond. So Mr. Abdollahian had a lot of knowledge of African history and Latin American history that allowed him to build these relationships. And we see the results of that, the work of this young foreign minister with a lot of vision and his knowledge of history. We see the results of it in the Sahel, in the escape of the Sahel countries from French colonialism. We see the results of this foreign affairs policy that led by Martyr Abdullahian on the Venezuelan economy and Venezuela itself. You know, the decisions to send oil and oil refinery equipment to Iran, the results on Cuba. So there was, of course, statements from Guatemala, Honduras, Brazil, South Africa, even Algeria, the Algerian president. And again, this is a relationship that was built by this team of Abdullahian and Raisi, reviving the relationship with Algeria, and Algeria making, taking positions that are more and more radical and more outwardly because of this new emerging alliance with Iran. These were, the martyrdom of these individuals is a huge loss. And these individuals had built personal relationships with presidents around the world, foreign affairs ministers, that have seen fruitful outcome to these relationships, right? And even the way that, look at what happened to Qatar when the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Bahrainis did a siege on Qatar. Remember that? And suddenly there was no food in the streets of Qatar because Qatar doesn't grow anything and everything's coming through. And it was Iran that saved Qatar. So everybody around this world right now knows that Iran has loyalty. Even if Iran disagrees with you, if you are you do good to Iran, Iran will stand by you and do good with you, even if you're an enemy. Okay, this is the honorable way that Iran built its relationship. And Sayyid, Abdullahian as a foreign affairs minister and President Raisi were the leaders of this new vision that saw the detente being signed with Saudi Arabia, saw these relationships across the world flourishing. And believe me, without Iran as a third pillar in this new multipolar world with China and Russia, China and Russia's job would have been much harder to reach out to the rest of Africa and Latin America and Asia.
So before I turn to the International Criminal Court development today, I just want to, because you reminded me about this, I've been meaning to do this for some time. There's an incredible, I don't know if you're familiar with this documentary, Laith. It's called La Mecque des Révolutionnaires. It's a French language documentary, which translated means the Mecca of revolutionaries. And it's about this brief shining moment in Algeria in the 1 or 2 years following its liberation from the cruel, sadistic control of the French imperialists. And in that 1 or 2 years, there was this president, his name was Ben Bella, extraordinary individual. It really did become Algiers, the Mecca of revolutionaries. And you had Mandela was going there, and Yasser Arafat was going there, and Che Guevara was going there.
The Black Panthers.
Black Panthers were there. I'm sure you know this history as well as anyone. And it all ended up getting derailed and squashed, as far as I can tell, by the officious intermeddling of Western imperial powers again. But this time it's more in an economic manner than a military manner, and pulling strings behind the corrupting people and so forth. But in some ways, it feels like I was too young at that moment. I was just a boy to really appreciate what was going on in Algeria and in the global South. But in many ways, it feels like we're heading back to that point in time, and we're revisiting it. And this time, it feels like the global South is much better positioned to win this fight and to win it decisively. Your thoughts before we move on to the question of the ICC?
Yeah. I mean, look at the streets of the West, look at the campuses. We are back to the late 1960s, early 1970s situation. Look at how the media is treating the demonstrators, let's say in the West, talking about, today the British are talking about how China and Russia are manipulating the algorithms to pump up pro-Palestinians. And you're like, what? You control the social media as a West, other than TikTok, obviously. And that's why TikTok is being banned. But the truth of the matter, we're hearing even the same logic about, Red Scare. We're already seeing the McCarthyist roundups of people and the blacklisting of people. We're seeing the people, youth being beat up in the streets, and very soon we'll see them being shot. And on the one hand, I agree with you. There's much more hope for the South and the East to win liberation from European domination today than there was in the 60s and the 70s. But at the same time, I believe because of that, there is a bigger possibility of even more repression that we haven't seen in a century happening on the soil in Europe, in North America.
Certainly in our lifetimes, absolutely. I absolutely couldn't agree more. It's the moment is as dangerous as it is promising. So with that, I'm going to, if you'll bear with me, Laith, I'm going to rant for a few minutes about what the so-called prosecutor.
We'll rant together all night.
Great. So then I'm going to invite you to chime in with your blistering commentary, but I just got to get this damn thing off my chest here. So let me just pull up the statement that this clown, Karim Khan, put out today. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of difficulty. Here we go. So you can find, I'm going to put a link to this, and I'll also put a link in the description to this video when I post it on YouTube. I'm going to put a link to the documentary Alger, la Mecque des Révolutionnaires, and also I'll put a link to this statement that was put out today by Mr. Khan. And so he starts by announcing that he's filing applications for warrants of arrest before the pretrial chamber of the International Criminal Court in the situation in the state of Palestine. So that's the first announcement. And then he goes on for looks like, I don't know, about 10 paragraphs about Hamas. And he announces that he is at the very top, after saying he's going to do something about Palestine, finally, after they massacred over 15,000 children and rendered it pretty much unlivable and openly declared their genocidal intent, he starts by talking about Hamas. And he says, we are going to indict and seek arrest warrants for Yahya Sinwar Mohammed Diab Ibrahim al-Mazri, referred to as Daif, Mohammed Daif, and Ismail Hanaya, who I believe is he's on the political side and is based in Qatar, if I'm not mistaken. And he goes on to say, so now that's three senior Hamas officials he's going to indict and seek arrest warrants for. And he lists 8 crimes, alleged war crimes. First one is extermination. The second one is murder. The third one, taking hostages. The fourth, rape and other acts of sexual violence. Fifth is torture as a crime against humanity. Then other inhumane acts, cruel treatment as a war crime, outrages upon personal dignity as a war crime in the context of captivity. So 8 separate war crimes based on 8 separate sections of the International Criminal Court's Rome Statute, its founding charter. And then he goes on for a number of paragraphs using quite, harsh and inflammatory language about the events of October 7th and repeating things. For example, I think now, I know, this is something that continues to generate controversy, but I think thanks largely to reporting by people like Ali Abunimah at Electronic Intifada and Max Blumenthal and others, it's become quite clear that this claim of mass rape, systematic mass rape by Hamas is unsupported by credible evidence. And a lot of it has been completely discredited, a lot of the so-called evidence. But But he seems to be buying into this theory, and I don't know. Obviously, I don't think any of us can say who aren't involved in some kind of criminal investigation with access to the witnesses and the forensic record, whether there were instances of sexual assault. There may well have been, but this idea of mass rape, which was ordered from on high to be committed by the Palestinian militants, there's no real evidence to support it. But he seems to embrace that. So then he goes on and he expresses his gratitude and his appreciation for the assistance that the survivors and families of victims of the October 7th attacks gave to him. He points out that he went to, the site of some of these attacks within the Zionist colony. And then he turns to Israel. And there he tells us that he is going to prosecute not 3, but 2 Israeli war criminals, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. Whereas with Hamas, he identifies 8 war crimes. With respect to them, he identifies 7. His language is less inflammatory. People can read this statement for themselves. As I said, I'm going to give them a link to it. And this is quite notable. He says at the outset, when he talks about the crimes with which he's going to charge them, he makes very clear that he's only talking about the Gaza Strip from October 8th, of last year. I'm going to come back to this in a moment. And then lists 7 crimes that are not mentioned there. Genocide. Genocide is not referred to anywhere in the statement, and the section of the I checked which section of the ICC statute, the Rome Statute, defines the crime of genocide, which is the worst crime you can commit in any circumstance, not just in international law, but as a matter of morality. He has left that one out entirely. He hasn't even cited the section which defines genocide. And in this statement, he keeps using the phrase reasonable grounds. I have reasonable grounds to believe this, and I have reasonable grounds to believe that. So he is setting the bar for bringing an indictment for war crimes that high, reasonable grounds. Well, on January 26th, the International Court of Justice, which is a creature of the United Nations Charter, not the Rome Statute, that's a separate instrument, they held that it was plausible that Israel is committing genocide. Every single Western judge concurred in that decision, including the president of the court at the time, who was a former Obama State Department official. And so there's no question that he has reasonable grounds to believe that Israel is committing genocide. The finding by the ICJ that it is plausible that Israel is committing genocide is essentially a finding that there are reasonable grounds to believe that Israel is committing genocide, and yet he leaves it out. Says nothing about it. Not only that, he's not prosecuting the most extreme, diabolical, sadistic psychopaths in the cabinet, who are Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. They're not even mentioned. He's not taking any action against the Israeli president, Isaac Herzog, who was specifically identified for his genocidal language in the decision of the ICJ. He says nothing in here about the crime of apartheid, even though Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the special rapporteurs, 2 of them for, 3 of them actually, 3 special rapporteurs of the United Nations for the human rights situation in Palestine, the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights group Yesh Din, and on, have all concurred that Israel is committing apartheid. There's no charge in here anywhere for apartheid. And the one that truly blows my mind, Laith, just absolutely blows my mind, is because he has limited this to the Gaza Strip. There is no action being taken in regard to Israel's settlements. Absolutely none, which are a slam dunk, 100%, take it to the bank war crime. And there have been multiple denunciations, even the Canadian government, for God's sakes, and many other Western governments explicitly recognize that the settlements in the West Bank constitute a grave violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention, and they've continued to expand them relentlessly. I think we had the biggest land grab in the history of the 55-year settlement project right now during the genocide in the West Bank on the orders of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, and he's doing nothing about that. And so I think this is a disgraceful announcement. I think he timed it, as I said at the outset. He had it sitting there on his desk, and he was waiting for a moment when there was going to be some big news that was going to dominate the attention of the global public. And he decided to put it out on that day to minimize attention being brought to this minimalist, really disgraceful failure to stand up for the Palestinian people. And I personally don't think any of us should have any confidence in this man. I think the only reason he has done this, he's done the absolute minimum, and he's done it only because if he hadn't acted now at some point, then whatever shreds of credibility the International Criminal Court has would have been completely eviscerated. I mean, everybody outside of the West would know that this is just nothing but a tool of imperialist domination, Western imperialist domination. And the last thing I want to say about this, and this is really, I think, the main point, and then I'm going to turn it over to you, Laith. I'm sick and tired of people in the Palestinian solidarity movement celebrating when these assholes throw crumbs at the Palestinian people. I'm sick of it. This is nothing to celebrate. Everybody out there who cares about the Palestinian cause should be saying loudly and clearly that this is a disgrace. And all the Zionists, of course, are going berserk, and they're saying, oh my God, he's drawing a moral equivalency between Hamas and Israel. I mean, any person who actually thinks that Palestinians are human beings would admit readily that what Israel has done is infinitely worse than everything alleged against Hamas. Even if everything that they say about Hamas on October 7th is true, it's still absolutely clear that Israel's crimes vastly surpass those of Hamas. Hamas is alleged by Israel to have killed 36 children on October 7th. Okay? These psychopaths have killed over 15,000 Palestinian children. And the Zionist lobby is out there going, oh my God, they're drawing a moral equivalency between, Hamas and Israel. Well, you're right. It isn't morally equivalent. What Israel has done is infinitely worse. So please, I'm begging you, my fellow comrades in the Palestinian solidarity movement, do not celebrate about this disgraceful act by the ICC. This is a cop-out. This man is a fraud, and he's an embarrassment to the international legal profession. I'm done now, Laith.
Well, I'm going to just add to fuel to the fire there, because I think there's even more sinister reasons why we're seeing this happening. Not only the timing of it, as you pointed out correctly, but look, we were just speaking about Algeria. Can you imagine that the Algerian people take their case of occupation and colonization to the International Court, Criminal Court, and then find themselves as criminals for fighting back against their occupiers and colonizers? The fact that the Palestinian Authority brought this case to the ICC was deliberate, because the Palestinian Authority is actually providing a service to the Zionists. What we will see today, let's say the warrants are actually issued, because the warrants are not issued yet. He's proposing to bring this in front of the judges so they can issue these warrants. Let's just say tomorrow, the ICC actually issues the warrants. There's no Western country, not one Western country, that will arrest Netanyahu or Gallant if he flies in their airspace or lands on their territory. But you know who is going to be hunted? It will be Hania, because he's in Qatar. He's probably right now trying to find out where he can go to a country that will protect him from this arrest warrant.
Which, of course, is going to greatly complicate any kind of negotiations to bring an end to this massacre that's happening every day in Gaza.
Yes. So Sinwar and Al-Dif, don't worry. There will not be, nobody will touch them. They're on the ground in Gaza. The Israelis can't even find them or try to assassinate them, let alone get the hold of them to send them to the ICC. And clearly, this is the problem. The ICC is the most corrupt of the international institutions, along with the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Chemicals Weapons Agency. These are the three most corrupt, most Western-controlled United Nations affiliated bodies. And so for me, the minute the PA was going this way, I was like, no, don't go this way. This is really a trap to try to create a moral equivalency between peoples resisting occupation and colonization with the crimes of their colonizer. And as you said, this house slave, Khan, in the indictment of the Palestinian resistance, he never ever used the word reasonable grounds. To him, it's a fact that Palestinian resistance raped Israeli women. While it has never happened in this 100 years of war that an Israeli woman was raped by Palestinians, ever. Including in the last few years, there was a few Israeli fanatical Zionist colonists that got lost and injured Palestinian towns and villages by accident, women, fanatical colonists with their children, and the Palestinian villagers protected them and took them back to their shitty colony. It never happened, of course, the rape. But you know what happened? And this is the other reason. And you said that he only he kept the whole investigation to the Gaza, only the Gaza territory. It's not only about the apartheid situation, why he didn't include all of the territory of Palestine in his investigation, or because of the settlements. No, you know why? Because of the death camps, the gulags that Ben Gvir has been running, the prison camps of the thousands of Palestinians that have been abducted out of Gaza, that are being raped now in those death camps. We have hundreds of testimonies of women and men and children that came out of these internment camps that Ben Gvir has started since October 7th, of being raped. Okay? This is why this puppet, Khan, is only including Gaza in an investigation. He wants to hide the actual rapes, the actual mass killings that is happening in these camps. Every day we're hearing
torture. He's charging Hamas with torture, but this torture that's happening in these camps, which, by the way, I think CNN just did a lengthy report on, because it's become so egregious and obvious what is going on in these things. That torture is off the table because of, as you point out, the fact that he's limited this ridiculous judicial intervention to the Gaza Strip.
Yes, yes. And of course, it wasn't only this one camp that the CNN covered this is happening. Ben Gvir turned every Israeli prison and every Palestinian prisoner into Abu Ghraib, into a Guantanamo. Mass across all the Israeli prisons, this is happening. Starvation, withholding medical treatment. Tens of Palestinian prisoners have died since October 7th because of this medical neglect, and the tortures and the rapes and the killings that are happening in these death camps. And so
I might just want to intervene because this is important. The lawyer, I believe she's an Israeli, for Marwan Barghouti, who enjoys very widespread support from people, Palestinians in both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and who has been in Israeli dungeons for 20 years now, has said that the treatment being meted out to him amounts to torture. And she described it, and it's horrible. Like, he has a dislocated shoulder because of the beatings. They were dragging him with handcuffs behind his back, and his eyes are swollen, and he's unrecognizable, she said. And she said, if they're willing to do that to Marwan Barghouti, what do you think they're doing to Palestinians who have no standing internationally? Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. So I think there's nothing to celebrate in this ICC warrant supposed beginning of issuing. It's in fact a scary thing. When the ICC, imagine the ICC were like the Vietnamese. What would have happened to them? They would have been called terrorists. Oh, they're holding American soldiers in their camps. Wah! That's apparently equivalent to 6 million Cambodians, Laotians, and Vietnamese. Similarly, right now, this is what it is a huge collaborationist move for anybody to have brought this to the ICC. I think, nothing good will come to the Palestinians from this. Only the worst outcomes.
I regrettably have to agree with you. The last person on earth that we should trust is Karim Khan, QC. And with that, Laith, I want to thank you again. Always a fascinating discussion. And please keep safe in Lebanon. And I look forward to our next chat.
All right. Have a nice day, man. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye. And this is Dimitri Lascaris from Kalamata, Greece on May 20th, 2024.